The famine was in its third year, and people in the village were starving to death every day. Only my family managed to have meat every few days. Aromatic, ruddy, glistening meat. But those bowls of meat were never meant for me. I could only huddle in the corner, watching with hungry eyes as father and my younger brother ate until their mouths shone with grease. But before long, they were both dead. And their mouths, for some reason, had been sewn shut with fine, dense stitches of black thread. Mother was cooking meat again. The large wood-fired pot, its lid on, was venting thick white steam. The aroma of fat wafted out, impossible to contain. My brother clung to the side of the stove, drool dripping from the corners of his mouth. "Mother, is it ready yet? I'm starving to death." "Almost ready," Mother replied. Mother lifted the lid, and a richer fragrance rushed out to meet us. In the boiling water, white foam churned, and a large piece of fatty meat bobbed up and down. We had no spices at home. Mother usually just boiled the meat in plain water with a bit of coarse salt, but the aroma alone was enough to make one's mouth water. Before the meat could even be placed in a bowl, my brother had already snatched a large, scalding piece and stuffed it into his mouth. I squatted in the corner, watching my brother and father feast. I would never get a single bite of something so good. In front of me was only a bowl of dark, murky soup, likely boiled from the roots of some plant. I smelt the meat and drank the earthy-tasting soup, and a more intense hunger made my head spin and my ears ring. Suddenly, I noticed a small white object on the edge of the stove. It was a tiny piece of fat that had fallen off when Mother was taking the meat out. I practically crawled over, carefully pinching the delectable morsel and swallowing it in one gulp. It was so fragrant. I had never eaten anything so fragrant in my life. Ah! A heavy blow suddenly struck the back of my head. I staggered and fell, seeing stars. "You! Are you mad with greed? Who said you could eat that? Spit it out!" Mother beat me viciously, her voice trembling with a hidden fear. Father also rushed over, kicking and punching me. I clutched my head and writhed in pain on the ground. A hard kick landed in my chest, and I couldn't help but retch. That piece of fat, not yet chewed, fell from my throat, mixed with blood. My brother, quick as lightning, lunged forward, picked up the meat I had vomited, and swallowed it instantly. I struggled to lift my head and saw my brother clapping his hands with a grin. At the corner of his mouth, a smear of the blood I had just coughed up was still visible. And his eyes gleamed with a sharp light. The village was in the grip of a great disaster. 3 consecutive years of failed harvests had led to many deaths from starvation. The fields were long barren of even a single grain. Forget crops, even the bark from the trees, the roots, and the rats in their holes had been eaten by the villagers. People died every day. What was more terrifying was that if a body wasn't buried quickly, it would soon be taken away. As for what it was taken for, I didn't dare to think. That day, Father returned empty-handed again from digging for potatoes. My brother wailed, crying that he was hungry, kicking and hitting Father. Mother usually came back earlier than Father, but today she was exceptionally late. It wasn't until deep into the night that she pushed the door open. For some reason, her face was unusually pale. She took out a wax paper package from her robes, her hands trembling as she unwrapped it. Father, my brother, and I all swallowed hard at the same time. It was a piece of glistening, translucent fat. "Wife, what kind of meat is this? Why does it smell so good?" Father asked. Mother shook her head and walked toward the stove. Don't ask. When it's cooked, you and your son eat it quickly. The meat was strangely fragrant as it cooked, so fragrant it was unsettling. As soon as the meat was done, Mother quickly handed the bowl to me, urging me to serve it to the men. Eat quickly, don't let the neighbors smell it. I held the bowl. In the milky white broth, a piece of meat bobbed up and down. I swallowed and couldn't resist picking up the piece of meat to examine it closely. There was a small wart on it. It was identical to the one on Mother's hand. I looked up at Mother in astonishment. She noticed my gaze and unnaturally hid her hand behind her back. Only then did I see that her hand was wrapped in a cloth that seemed to be seeping blood. I secretly hid that small piece of meat with the wart. Every few days, Mother would go out, always returning late at night like a thief, and she would bring back a piece of meat. I never got to eat any of that meat, not even a sip of the broth. The small silver lining was that because Father and my brother had meat, the root soup or rotten potatoes that our family of 4 usually had to share were now enough for Mother and me. Father and my brother always ate until their mouths were slick with grease. But only I noticed that every time Mother brought back meat, she would have new injuries on her body. I was worried. Could she be cutting off her own flesh? But her wounds were never severe. And I knew it was impossible for someone to cut off such a large piece of meat from their own body every few days. They would die. It wasn't just me who was curious, Father was too. Wife, this divine meat, where on earth are you finding it? Mother adamantly refused to say, only insisting that we must, absolutely must, keep it a secret. She specifically threatened my brother that if he dared to blab, she would tear his mouth apart. My brother nodded like a pecking chicken. I guessed he wasn't so much worried about his mouth being torn as he was about no longer getting to eat that divine meat. But some things, no matter how tight-lipped we were, would eventually get out. Because of the aroma. The smell of the cooking meat was too strong. Even though we kept the doors and windows shut tight every time we cooked, it would inevitably escape through the cracks. Right into other people's noses. On this day, Mother was hurriedly cooking meat. The bolted wooden door was suddenly kicked open. Koji's wife, what delicious thing are you cooking? I could smell this fragrance from the edge of the village. Mother flinched, and the pot lid in her hand fell to the ground with a loud clang. It was the village chief. Before the great disaster, my mother worked in the local government office, managing the regional gazettes. Those county and township records had been left unattended in the office for years, many damaged by water and insects. My mother, with her strong sense of responsibility, rebound and repaired them one by one, and in doing so, read through the chronicles of all the villages in the area. Among them, our village's chronicle recorded a small incident. It happened during the last Great Famine. That was over 70 years ago. The situation then was as severe as it was now, with many starving to death. But later, someone discovered a large vat in the village's ancestral hall. Inside the vat, something special was being kept. The chronicle called it a flesh ganoderma. It looked like a piece of meat, and it smelled and tasted like meat when eaten. The flesh ganoderma is a living thing. As long as you feed it with human flesh and blood, it will grow. If you cut off a piece, it will regenerate after a short time, becoming whole again. In other words, it eats people, and is eaten by people. Not long ago, our family ran out of food, and my brother and I were on the verge of starvation. Mother suddenly remembered this account from the village chronicle. She hadn't held out much hope, but to her surprise, she actually found the vat containing the flesh Ganoderma. She tried feeding it with her own flesh and blood, and just as the chronicle described, the flesh Ganoderma grew a little larger. So Mother quickly took out her knife, cut off a piece of the flesh Ganoderma, and ran home with it tucked in her robes. Mother's words left us all dumbfounded. As the village chief listened, his eyes turned red. He rubbed his hands together greedily, his excitement causing his nostrils to flare. To think our rundown village has such a treasure! Where is this flesh Ganoderma now? Mother quickly waved her hands. The chronicle says you mustn't eat the flesh Ganoderma. During the last disaster, someone who ate its flesh met a terrible end. The village chief rudely interrupted, "I don't believe in such nonsense. Take me to see that flesh Ganoderma now." That night, we saw the large vat in the ancestral hall. The village chief was overjoyed at the sight of its contents. Turning around, his expression changed in an instant. "Koji's wife, and the rest of you, listen up. This thing is a treasure of the village, and it will be handed over to the state in the future." His eyes darted around. "But before that, I, as the village chief, have the right to dispose of all village property. None of you are to speak a word about this treasure, or I won't spare you." As the price for our silence, the chief promised to give us a regular share of the meat. On the way home that night, Mother seemed distracted. I quietly asked her what was wrong. Mother told me that flesh Ganoderma is a malevolent thing. The chronicle says it is sustained by human sacrifices. Do you know what human sacrifices are? I shook my head, uncomprehending. "Living women," she said. The next day, the village chief kicked open our door again, fuming. "Koji's wife, are you playing me for a fool?" He grabbed my mother by the collar, his eyes nearly bulging from their sockets. Father managed to pull him away with gentle persuasion. I quickly patted my mother's chest to help her breathe. Mother asked him if he had fed the flesh Ganoderma. The chief said, "I wanted to see what it eats, so I threw in some rocks and wood. Oh, I also threw in that dead dog from Malien the butcher's house." Not only did it not grow, it became incredibly foul-smelling, completely inedible. Father quickly explained, "She said it needs to be fed with human flesh and blood. Rocks and a dead dog probably won't work." The village chief looked thoughtful, then, after a fit of anger, he left. I felt a faint sense of unease, as if something terrible was about to happen in the village. One day, I heard the villagers saying that the widow at the village entrance, Widow Wang, had disappeared. Ensu told me they all say she starved to death, and someone dragged her body home. Ensu was the carpenter's daughter and a little slow-witted, so all the adults and children in the village bullied her. I was the only one who talked to her, and she was only friends with me. I told her I knew what happened to Widow Wang, but she couldn't tell anyone. Ensu nodded vigorously. That day, our family was out of food again. Father sent me to the village chief's house to ask for the meat he had promised. As I approached the chief's house, I heard seductive sounds leaking from the closed door. I felt embarrassed but couldn't resist my curiosity, so I peered through a crack in the door. Widow Wang was topless, lounging in the village chief's arms, her brightly painted lips pressed against his catfish-like mouth. Afterward, she begged the chief to get her some grain. The chief, looking satisfied, caressed her plump body and said mysteriously, "Grain is nothing. I'll give you something much rarer." I followed them to the ancestral hall. When Widow Wang saw the flesh Ganoderma, her eyes lit up, and she reached into the vat to grab it. The chief panicked, grabbing her by her long hair and slapping her face hard. By the time he came to his senses, Widow Wang was unconscious. The chief was frantic. He paced back and forth, muttering, "I've killed someone, what do I do?" Suddenly, his gaze drifted to the vat. His lips twitched, and he let out a chilling chuckle. "You tried to steal my treasure, so you can't blame me for this. I'll just use you, hee hee." I saw him drag Widow Wang by her long hair and throw her into the vat. The large vat trembled violently. Then, a familiar, strange fragrance wafted out. The flesh Ganoderma had eaten Widow Wang. Amid the chief's drooling laughter, I ran for my life back home. Mother had said that the human sacrifices to feed the flesh Ganoderma had to be living women. Widow Wang hadn't been killed by the chief's blows. She was alive when she became food for the flesh Ganoderma. The next day, the village chief came to our house again. Surprisingly, his attitude was exceptionally cordial this time. He even brought a bag of old grain for our family, a priceless commodity in these times. He got straight to the point, asking my father to take care of the flesh Ganoderma for him. "Koji, as long as you raise this big treasure well for me, I, as the village chief, will certainly not treat you unfairly." Father was both frightened and hesitant, stammering, What will I use to feed it?" The chief wrapped his thick arm around my father's neck. "You'll have to figure that out yourself. If worse comes to worst." His eyes scanned me from head to toe, his tone sinister. "Don't you have a daughter? You already have an heir. With Guan to carry on the family line, that girl Yu is just another mouth to feed." My father was silent as a cicada in winter. As they were talking, there was a commotion in the courtyard. I opened the door to see Kenji, the village carpenter. Kenji was Ensu's father. He had come to our house looking for the village chief about Ensu. Ensu had disappeared. The chief emerged from the house, shrugging on a jacket. "What's all the noise?" In these times, every family loses someone. I'm the village chief, but I can't control the heavens. Kenji gestured with his eyes, suggesting the chief step aside to talk. I sidled up to the doorway, pretending to close it, and overheard Kenji say the words, "Flesh Ganoderma." The chief, as if facing a great enemy, grabbed Kenji and left our house. I followed them quietly, eavesdropping on their conversation. It turned out that Ensu had gone home that day and told her father the secret I had shared. Though she was simple-minded, she was good at grasping the main points, and Kenji had gotten the gist of the flesh Ganoderma secret. The very next day, Ensu disappeared. Kenji had come to confront the chief, insisting that Ensu's death was connected to the flesh Ganoderma. I was puzzled. Kenji was notoriously cruel to Ensu, often beating and scolding her. Why was he suddenly so concerned now that she was gone? The two men walked to the large willow tree. The chief pulled out a cigarette, and Kenji quickly lit it for him. The chief pondered for a moment, then said, "Your daughter's disappearance. As the village chief, I must bear some responsibility." He lowered his voice and said to Kenji, "Since you already know about that treasure, I won't hide it from you. How about this? As long as you promise not to pursue your daughter's matter, I'll give you a share of the meat from now on." Kenji's face crinkled into a smile. The deal was struck. But the village chief soon regretted it. He had forgotten that Kenji was the biggest gossip in the village. What he knew, the whole village would soon know. News of the flesh Ganoderma spread like wildfire. Seeing that he could no longer hide it, the chief changed his strategy. He set up a stall at his home, selling the divine meat at a marked price. For a time, his doorway was thronged with customers. I learned then that although the 3 years of famine had left the village without a single grain, every household had family heirlooms that were useless in such times. Before, those Tang dynasty jars and Song dynasty bowls couldn't even be traded for a bag of millet. Now, under the chief's business acumen, they all found their value. The chief made a fortune, and the villagers all had meat to eat. Of course, women were not worthy of eating the divine meat. Before long, everyone noticed something was amiss. One after another, people began to disappear from the village every day. Strangely, it wasn't women who were disappearing, but men, mostly able-bodied young men and newborn males. Not only the villagers but also the chief and my family were perplexed. Men could not be human sacrifices, so where could they have gone? A palpable sense of unease grew daily in the village. Until one day, my brother also disappeared. My father, who had been holding back for so long, could no longer contain himself. He grabbed an axe and went to settle accounts with the chief. Mother, fearing for father's safety, sent me to follow him. But I witnessed it myself. Father, believing the chief had harmed the family's heir, clashed with him. In a moment of carelessness, the chief snatched the axe and struck father in the back of the head. Seeing my father fall into a pool of blood, I let out a terrified scream. The chief, holding the dripping axe, his eyes bloodshot, panted as he walked towards me. From now on, you will take care of the flesh Ganoderma for me in your father's place. I was locked in the ancestral hall, my daily job to watch over the large vat for the village chief. Lately, refugees from other villages had been arriving. I didn't know what methods the chief used, but he managed to detain all the able-bodied men for labor. As for the women from other villages, he threw them all into the ancestral hall and left them in my care. I knew he intended to use them as human sacrifices. Every so often, he would come to the hall to check on the growth of the flesh Ganoderma, then cut off what he needed, either to eat or to sell. People came and went from the ancestral hall. There was only one woman whom I kept hidden and cared for well. Her name was Yun, a refugee from the neighboring village of Hu. She was already 7 or 8 months pregnant. She looked no older than 20, thin and small, but her belly was large. I pitied her, so I often shared the rice water and potatoes the chief gave me with her. She said her husband would surely come to take her away, that he loved her very much. I remained non-committal. I couldn't explain to her that her husband might at that very moment be eating something nourished by the flesh and blood of her sisters. The flesh Ganoderma in the vat had grown enormous. It was cut, and it grew back, almost too large for the vat to contain. The chief was pleased with my work as a keeper, and would occasionally grant me leave to go out for some fresh air. He knew that a girl in her teens like me had nowhere to go anyway. I snuck back home, only to find the house deserted. My brother was gone, my father was dead, and my mother's whereabouts were unknown. The only small comfort was that by guarding the flesh Ganoderma day in day out, I could be certain that mother had not become a human sacrifice. If she had truly escaped the village, perhaps it was for the best. One day, a major event occurred in the village. My brother Guan's body was discovered on the hill behind the village. When found, he was wearing the clothes he had on when he disappeared, with no visible injuries. Only his mouth had been sewn shut with the thick black thread used for making shoe soles. When I was out for air, I had examined it closely. The stitches on his lips were incredibly fine and dense. Strangely, I felt no particular sadness or grief. Growing up, Guan had been the apple of father's eye. If there was a single grain of rice in the house, it had to be given to him first. Because he was the heir, meant to carry on the family line. This made him arrogant and tyrannical, both at home and in the village. He not only hit me but also my mother. Girls like Ensu were frequently bullied by him. Now that father was also dead, there was likely no one in the world who would genuinely grieve for Guan. The village chief, of course, was unconcerned, until the bodies of the missing men began to appear one after another. Each one had their mouth sewn shut with black thread. Only then did the chief begin to panic. These dead were the village's able-bodied men. Some of them might have been smoking with him under the willow tree just days before, only to turn up stiff as a board. Helpless, the chief sent someone to invite an old woman from the village for consultation. Everyone in our village, young and old, called her the old aunt. I didn't know how old the old aunt was, but I guessed she was at least in her 70s or 80s. She had no husband, and certainly no children. For as long as I could remember, she always sat alone in her house. Only for major village events, or for conflicts that even the chief couldn't resolve, would she be called upon to preside. I hadn't seen her much during these years of famine. I had once thought she had passed away. After all, it would be difficult for an elderly person to survive with so little food and drink. Unexpectedly, she looked no different from the last time I had seen her before the disaster. I had heard she was a lifelong vegetarian, even practicing fasting. It was probably true. The chief had her brought over. She walked with her hands behind her back, circling the bodies laid out on the threshing ground, finally stopping in front of the chief. I may stay at home, but I know all about the good deeds you've been up to. I had always found the old aunt's face fierce. I never dared to look at her growing up. The adults in the village used her name to scare children. The mention of it would quiet a crying baby at night. The chief was somewhat intimidated by her as well, not daring to meet her gaze. The village has fallen on hard times. Some things were unavoidable. The old aunt snorted. Our village has had legends of the flesh Ganoderma for hundreds of years. But each time it appears, it is during a great famine, and everyone who eats its flesh meets a terrible fate. This was recorded in the village chronicle, and my mother had mentioned it too. The chief had dismissed it at the time. It seemed it was true after all. But the chief refused to believe it. Without that treasure, half the village would have starved to death by now. It's a life-saving thing, how could it be harmful? He growled with resentment. It must be Koji's wife's doing. Ever since she ran away from the village, all these unlucky things started happening. He immediately called for a village-wide meeting. Tonight, all the men of the village will come with me to find that woman. Even if we have to turn the whole village upside down, we will find her. But that night's plan failed to materialize. Because the village chief was also dead. When his body was found, his mouth, too, had been sewn shut with black thread. I was dragged from my sleep, pushed and shoved into the middle of the courtyard. A crowd surrounded me, demanding to know my mother's whereabouts. The old aunt pushed through the crowd and stood before me, her wrinkled face something that would give me nightmares. I know you've been a cunning girl since you were little. I shook my head, shrinking back desperately. She grabbed me with a hand that was skeletal yet surprisingly strong. Your mother is connected to the chief's death. If you know where she is, you'd better tell us now, or else. Terrified, I tearfully pulled something from my pocket. My My mother is dead. At such a close distance, I saw the old ant's brown pupils contract violently. She held the thing I handed her, the tips of her withered fingers trembling. My mother, she was fed to the flesh Ganoderma by the village chief. In the old ant's hand was a small, shriveled, blackened piece of meat. And on that meat was a tiny brown wart, identical to the one on my mother's hand. That night, I tossed and turned on my bed in the ancestral hall. Worried about Yun, who was about to give birth, I had been staying and eating in the hall instead of going home. Somehow, the old ant's reaction to the piece of meat during the day seemed unusual to me. She must know some secret about the flesh Ganoderma. I leaped from the bed and, under the dim moonlight, crept to the old ant's house. Coincidentally, just as I reached her door, it opened. The old ant walked out, her steps firm as she headed away. So late at night, where could she be going? I tiptoed after her, all the way to the carpenter Kenji's house. The old ant knocked persistently on the door. After a long while, Kenji answered, cursing under his breath. The moment he opened the door, the old ant suddenly sprayed something in his face. Kenji collapsed. The old ant then produced a small vial from her clothes and poured its contents into Kenji's mouth. Kenji's legs kicked wildly a few times, and then he was still. Without pausing, the old ant dragged Kenji's body to a well outside the courtyard. Kenji was a large man, and moving him took a considerable effort. Then, I saw the old ant sit on the edge of the well to catch her breath, and she pulled a small black cloth bundle from her pocket. It was a sewing kit. By the moonlight, she threaded her needle. Then, I watched as she calmly used the needle and thread to sew Kenji's upper and lower lips together. The clouds parted a little, and the dim, uncertain moonlight turned bright. Under the moonlight, the old ant's face was as aged and sharp as ever. I covered my mouth with my hand, afraid to even breathe. I watched as she expertly tied a knot and cut the thread. "You!" she suddenly called out. Hearing my name so unexpectedly, my legs gave way, and I collapsed to the ground. She glared at me, as if disgusted by my weakness. "Get over here!" I scrambled to her side. "Look at you, you pathetic thing," she scolded. "You're worse than an old woman like me." I pleaded with her, "Old ant, please spare me. I didn't see anything, I won't say anything." She glared at me again. "You don't need to speak. Just listen to me." Over 70 years ago, during the last great drought and famine, the old ant was just a young girl. The situation was just as dire then, with many people starving to death. Then one day, someone in the village started eating meat. The meat had a strange, intoxicating aroma that filled the entire village when one family cooked it, making everyone's mouth water. The secret of the flesh Ganoderma spread, and soon the villagers reached a consensus. They would collectively nurture the flesh Ganoderma, and the meat harvested would be distributed fairly among everyone. The method of nurturing was for each family to offer up one of its female members. Unsurprisingly, the old ant was also taken to be a human sacrifice. In that hellish ancestral hall, as a young girl, she watched as woman after woman, struggling and screaming, was held down by the men they knew, trusted, and lived with day and night, their heads pushed down, their limbs grabbed, and thrown into the large vat containing the flesh Ganoderma. Not a single drop of blood was shed. The flesh Ganoderma grew features from the women's bodies, red moles, colored fingernails, pale blue birthmarks. And the men, ignoring all this, devoured the simply cooked meat with gusto. Whether it was hunger that dulled their sense of guilt or amplified their primal instincts, no one expressed any objection or disgust. Fortunately, not long after, it rained heavily for 3 days, and the drought and famine came to an end. The old ant narrowly escaped her fate. When it was all over, the villagers tacitly agreed never to speak of what had happened. But only the old ant, who had witnessed those horrific scenes and survived, remembered everything. What happened then became the nightmare of her life. She could never touch meat again and could never be near a man for the rest of her life. The village chief at the time ordered the flesh Ganoderma to be destroyed after the crisis eased, as if it had never happened. But, the old ant's gaze was chilling. When that thing reappeared after all these years, I knew someone had been selfish last time and failed to dispose of this evil object. I asked tentatively, "So, was it you? I mean, all those men. Including my brother." The old ant wore a triumphant expression. "Who else? I knew those men were about to start harming women again. I couldn't allow that to happen. So she stayed indoors during the day and came out at night, using her special concoction to drug the men, then pouring poison down their throats to kill each one who had eaten the flesh Ganoderma. Finally, she would use her needle and thread to sew their mouths shut. Whether for the gluttonous desires of their mouths or for the sweet or harsh words they used against women, in death, they must finally be silent." The famine worsened. The nearby villages had all run out of food, and a large number of refugees flooded into our village. But more terrifying than the refugees were the bandits. The bandits in the mountains had managed to survive the first 2 years of the disaster by robbing passing caravans and cars from the city. But as everyone's lives became more difficult, there was no one left for them to exploit. Forced by circumstances, the bandits came down from the mountains. The most fearsome among them was a group called the Horse-Beating Gang, led by a fierce man named Hualong. Unlike the refugees, the Horse-Beating Gang came with guns. I guessed that when they first came down to the village, their intention was only to rob for money and food. After all, the famine was in its 3rd year, and even the most prosperous village would have been stripped bare. Hualong probably never expected to smell meat in our small, dilapidated village. It was all the fault of Mao Yan, the village butcher. After the village chief's death, the village had been in a state of chaos. To prevent any further trouble, the villagers decided to have the respected old ant take charge. The old ant went with the flow, first leading people to properly handle the dead, burying them together in the ancestral graveyard behind the hall. Then, she established a new village rule: given that the flesh Ganoderma has brought great disaster upon the village, from now on, unless absolutely necessary, all are forbidden from eating it. The large vat containing the flesh Ganoderma was sealed with river mud and locked away in the ancestral hall, with no one allowed near it. But Mao Yan, lazy and gluttonous, was suddenly overcome by a craving one day and couldn't resist. Under the cover of darkness, he snuck into the ancestral hall, broke the lock, removed the mud seal, and cut off a large piece of the flesh Ganoderma to take home and cook in a big pot. The aroma instantly filled the air. The strange fragrance attracted the bandits. The Horse-Beating Gang followed the scent into the village and burst directly into Mao Yan's house. When they broke down the door, Mao Yan hadn't even had a chance to take a single bite of the cooked meat. The bandits, who hadn't touched meat in nearly a year, couldn't control themselves at the smell. Only their leader, Hualong, remained unusually calm. He pressed his knife to Mao Yan's neck. "Speak! Where did this meat come from?" Mao Yan, terrified, wet his pants and confessed everything. Without a word, Hualong led his men straight to the ancestral hall. The old ant was already waiting there. Hualong pulled out his gun and pointed it at the old ant. "Old woman, if you know what's good for you, get out of the way. I only want that treasure today. I don't want to waste my energy killing people." The old ant faced his gun, her words ringing with conviction. "Humph, you probably don't know that this is no treasure, but an evil entity." Hualong grew impatient. "Even if it's an evil entity, I'm taking it today. Everyone in the village knows that eating the flesh of the Ganoderma brings a terrible fate." The group of bandits erupted in thunderous laughter. Hualong, however, seemed thoughtful. He stepped into the ancestral hall, not even glancing at me standing inside, and walked straight to the large vat. The seal on the vat had been broken by Malian. He peered inside. "You, and you, bring that old woman over here." The old ant was forced to the ground next to the large vat by two strong young bandits. "What are you doing?" she shouted, and for the first time, I heard fear in her aged voice. Hualong smiled wickedly, suddenly drew his dagger, and cut a piece of flesh from the vat. "Since you say eating this thing brings a terrible fate, then you can eat it and show me." "No." "Old ant." My voice trembled, laced with tears. The old ant's hair, usually tied in a neat bun, was now disheveled. She sat staring blankly at the edge of the well. She looked nothing like the stern, fierce elder I remembered. After the nightmare of the past few hours, she seemed to have aged 30 years. "Don't cry." She struggled to speak, trying to maintain her former authority, but she was trembling more than I was. I was afraid she would collapse at any moment. You know what to do." "I can't." "You can." She tremblingly reached out a hand to me. For the first time in my life, I held that withered, cold hand. "Old ant, don't. Let's think of another way. Aren't you the one who always has a solution?" I knelt before her, crying. She gently touched my face, her rough fingers scraping my skin. "Good girl, I wouldn't have lived much longer anyway. If my old life can still be of some use, then what we do today will all be worth it." She placed something in my hand and curled my fingers around it. I knew what it was. I had seen her take it out before. "After I die, sew my mouth shut." She grinned, revealing the uneven teeth in her mouth. It was the first time I had ever seen her smile at me. "After that, you know what to do." She took out a small vial and drank it down without hesitation. I watched her slowly fall before me and rushed to catch her body. Her lips moved slightly. "You, girl, be brave." Under the moonlight, my tears fell. Using the sewing kit the old ant had given me, stitch by stitch, I sewed her mouth shut. At dawn, Hualong and his bandits stared at the old ant's body, looking at each other in disbelief. So this kind of cursed thing really exists? Hualong scratched the back of his head, at a loss for what to do. A subordinate suddenly said, "Boss, I have an idea. Since we can't eat this treasure, we can't let it go to waste. I heard there's a rich boss in the provincial capital, surnamed Shi, who loves collecting rare and strange things. Why don't we sell it to him?" Hualong's eyes lit up. But my heart sank. I knew that, no matter what, this thing could not leave the village. Otherwise, more women would suffer. I had to think of a way. That night, Mr. Shi's car drove into our village and parked directly in front of the ancestral hall. He looked at the flesh Ganoderma in the large vat, so happy he was practically dancing. His smooth, round, fat face was flushed red. "Brother Hualong, name your price." Hualong, who had been on edge, finally relaxed, his hand that had been secretly gripping his weapon coming out into the open. "Easy, easy. I've set up a feast outside. The place is simple, I hope you don't mind, Mr. Shi. We can eat and talk." I watched the two men leave the ancestral hall, then crept out from my hiding place. I didn't have much time, I had to act fast. From a distance, I heard the clamor of voices outside the ancestral hall. I wiped the sweat from my brow, not bothering to dust off the dirt from my clothes, and quickly hid in the corner again. Just in time. A deal's a deal. 3 carts of grain. 2 carts of fat pigs. Sign it. The door of the ancestral hall was thrown open. Mr. Shi, flushed from drinking, reeked of alcohol and was hiccuping. "Brother Hualong is a straight shooter." Then goods for payment, brother. I'll take delivery now." Hualong was also slurring his words. He waved his hand at his men. "What are you waiting for? Inspect the goods for my big brother." 2 bandits excitedly rushed forward to the large vat. The moment they lifted the lid, a foul stench hit them. "Ugh! What the hell is this? It stinks! It stinks to high heaven!" The 2 men staggered out of the ancestral hall and vomited on the ground. Hualong and Mr. Shi were shocked. Hualong rushed forward, lifted the lid, and was thrown back several meters by the overwhelming stench. "What is going on?" Mr. Shi, holding his breath against the smell, went forward, took one look, and his eyes turned bloodshot as he fled in terror. The flesh Ganoderma in the vat had swollen to twice its previous size. Not only that, it was bubbling and heaving, its color changing from flesh tone to a dark brown, and it was emitting a suspicious glow and the stench of a rotting corpse. Thanks to the village chief's body, I had dug him up from the ancestral graveyard behind the hall. My mother had said that the human sacrifices to nurture the flesh Ganoderma had to be living women. If it was any other dead thing, whether rocks, wood, or dead pigs and dogs, it would turn the flesh Ganoderma into a pile of foul-smelling, rotten meat. I thought, the village chief is dead. He was no different from a dead pig or dog. Mr. Shi felt he had been made a fool of. His fat face swelled like a red balloon, his eyes nearly popping out of their sockets. "Hualong! You mountain brute, you dare to disgust me!" He pulled out a gun and shot Hualong. Almost simultaneously, Hualong's bullet hit Mr. Shi between the eyes. Mr. Shi's obese body fell like a mountain of flesh. The subordinates on both sides erupted into chaos. The small village sounded like it was celebrating the new year with firecrackers, as gunshots rang out one after another. I huddled in the corner of the ancestral hall, covering my ears tightly, trembling. Suddenly, a powerful hand grabbed me, lifting me almost completely off the ground. Hualong had me by the throat with one hand. At such a close distance, I could see the veins throbbing on his face. "You wretched girl! You ruined my good business!" I struggled desperately in his grip, my movements weakening as I suffocated. I thought, I am going to die. But could I really die just like this? Had I truly finished everything I needed to do? If not, how could I face her? Face them. The old aunt. Mother. Bang! A gunshot. I fell heavily to the ground. The fall nearly knocked me out, but it also cleared my airway. I gasped for air, desperately breathing until my vision cleared. I struggled to push myself up and looked towards the entrance. It was Mother. My mother stood outside the threshold of the ancestral hall, the barrel of her gun still smoking. Behind her was a group of familiar-looking women. They were the women who had come to our village as refugees and been captured by the village chief to be used as human sacrifices. You! Don't be afraid. Mother is here. Tears blurred my vision. Mother! Back then, when I was taking care of the flesh Ganoderma for the village chief in the ancestral hall, the women who were sent in were all snuck out of the village at night by my mother and me, and hidden away. To deceive the village chief, and to deceive the flesh Ganoderma, each woman, before leaving, cut off a piece of her own flesh and blood to feed it. Even I was no exception. I was never an exception. I was just like them, a woman sharing a common destiny. Mother used the gun from the dead Mr. Sher's hand to shoot Hualong, saving me. But Hualong, with his last bit of strength, also managed to shoot Mother. The remaining bandits scattered and fled back to the mountains. Mother collapsed in my arms, her breath faint. It's my fault, it's all my fault. I shook my head, crying, no, Mother. It's their fault. Tears streamed from the corners of Mother's eyes. I was so afraid you would starve to death. I knew they wouldn't spare you. If there was no food, I didn't know what those two, father and son, would do. So I had to find the flesh Ganoderma. But I didn't dare let you eat a single bite. I wanted every bite my daughter ate to be clean. Mother. To bring the flesh Ganoderma back into the world was my sin. I harmed everyone. So I altered the village chronicle, saying that those who ate the flesh Ganoderma would face retribution, a heavenly punishment, just to stop people from coveting it. I was the one who implicated Widow Wang and that girl Ensu. I was the one who implicated the old aunt. So the old aunt knew everything. That's why when I said Mother had been fed to the flesh Ganoderma, the usually calm and composed old woman had suddenly lost her composure. She knew Mother had done it all. And she had risked her life to help Mother maintain that lie. Mother gripped my hand with all her might. You promise me you must destroy it. It cannot be allowed to harm another woman. I built a tall pyre of hay in the middle of the ancestral hall and placed Mother's body on top. A torch ignited the hay. I watched the roaring fire, my eyes filled with tears, and kowtowed 3 times to Mother, until the blood from my forehead trickled down my face. In the towering flames, the ancestral hall and the flesh Ganoderma, along with Mother's body, were all reduced to ashes. I stood on the hillside outside the village, looking back. In one hand, I carried Hualong's gun. In the other, I held a swaddled baby. It was Yun's newborn child. Behind me were the women from our village, from Hu village, and from several other villages. From a distance, I thought I heard a weathered, powerful voice in the wind. You girl, be brave. I turned around, and in that windy whisper, I began to walk toward the deep mountains.